25 years ago, Steve Jobs said his famous "you want to lick it" from the stage. And you really did want to. Look at these three bright candies. In the 25 years since, macOS first calmed down its colors, then went fully flat following the iPhones, and finally a year ago, along with the rest of Apple's system, transformed into a brand new design language, liquid glass. macOS feels incredibly stable and consistent, especially compared to competitors who in the same period have radically changed their designs, concepts and approaches multiple times. All this time, the macOS traffic client stayed almost the same, and recently it even expanded into iPadOS. This difference in survival is not a historical accident, it's a deliberate choice. And explaining it answers a much bigger question. What even is design? Aesthetic? Beauty? Functionalism? Usability? All of it together? We'll see how differently various companies and designers answer that question, and how big a gap their answers create inside the very idea of what design is. And all of it sits inside these three colored dots, which appeared in 2001 in macOS 10. To understand where they came from, let's go back 1 year earlier. The approach behind their creation will help us understand how immortal design is born. This is macOS 9, the predecessor to macOS 10, except it isn't the real parent, it's the adopted one. The real parent is Next Step. macOS X was actually built on it. Its architecture still sits at the core of macOS to this day, but there is nothing visually similar here either. Two great corporate operating systems, typical of their time. Put Windows 98 next to them and you'll barely tell them apart, which tell us something. Plain gray interfaces were the dominant norm of that era. Releasing the next system as a slight evolution of the previous one would have been a safe bet, but not for Apple and not for Steve Jobs. And surprisingly, this had nothing to do with the company's ideology or Jobs' character directly. It had to do with the unique set of problems that intersected at this specific moment. Apple was at rock bottom, going through massive crisis. Steve Jobs, fired from his own company a decade earlier, had triumphantly returned. To make that happen, Apple had bought his company Next, and his task wasn't only to revive Apple. He also had to consolidate his own power, so the nightmare of his firing could never repeat. He needed to save the company in a single move, and do it in the way that locked in his control. Beyond these two entities at risk, Apple and Jobs, there was a third one, the Human Interface Group. The macOS design team led by Cordell Ratzlaff was in the same chain, with everything on the line. At one of their first meetings, Jobs called them a bunch of amateurs and idiots because of the old macOS 9. Ratzlaff, in turn, would say about Next Step that it was a beautiful system in an ugly wrapper. This team was clearly at risk of being kicked out of the new Apple. All of them at once. Crisis situations create pressure and constraints that either kill or push you toward breakthrough decisions. Ratzlaff came to his design team with the question: what is the least computer-like thing imaginable? A strange question at first glance, but it fit the broader logic of the moment. Everything was bad, and what they needed was something fundamentally different. No risk, no win. They need a risky big bet. And the team came back with the answer. The least computer-like things was candy, liquor and liquids. I want to highlight this. This wasn't dictated from above by Jobs. This was a decision made inside the team. A team fighting for its own survival. By the way, this is the same team where Buzz Aldrin was working, the designer who later became a legend. He went on to design a huge amount of what underlies how we interact with every touch device today. By the way, my touch device runs wallpapers I made myself. And it's been that way for as long as I can remember. I made wallpapers and then they spread out to all my friends and everyone around me. Right now my Mac is running wallpapers I made for myself while I was writing the script for this video. Retro pixel icons, refracted through acrylic. And you can buy these exact wallpapers for yourself. The price is whatever you think is fair, even zero. For me right now this is an experiment, not a business. Back to the video. Jobs, who didn't trust designer in general, saw their first prototypes built around this candy and liquor concept and was floored. He took the entire team under his personal protection and supervision. The system looked completely unlike anything that had existed in the design world before it. And it was Jobs' control that helped crystallize a systematic approach to the design. Non-computer-like wasn't enough. The design had to engage directly with the human body and perception. It had to be anthropological design. Let's listen one more time, but this time let's try to actually understand what's behind this phrase.
One of the design goals was when you saw it, you wanted to lick it.
Whatever the task at hand, functional or emotional, Jobs and the team tried to make every solution as sharp as possible in terms of penetrating human nature. They want to lick it instant a vivid, meme-worthy example of this approach. But let's get back to our traffic light. Here is the thing. Both the legendary Ording and Václav were trained professional designers. To them it was obvious. Controls like this should be invisible. They shouldn't distract or get in the way. And then Jobs brought them this idea of a traffic light as the way to control the windows. Bright colors in the corner of every window. Ording said it bluntly. What's the point? These functions don't work like a traffic light. The logic was clear. Red means close, a destructive action. Yellow means minimize, temporary. Green, back then it didn't mean maximize the way it does now. It meant feed to content, keeping the windows in the user's focus. But traffic light don't work like that. Where is the metaphor here? They kept asking Jobs. Everyone knows these colors, he answered. A strange answer at first, because it doesn't actually refute the designer's arguments. But there is logic to it. You ignore what doesn't matter much when you shift the lens you're looking through. Jobs' strategy was to offer solutions that work on a different level of perception. First, the simple fact of using familiar, emotionally charged colors, that's no longer a metaphor pointing at an object. That's an appeal to more primitive, simpler reaction. And simplicity and emotion are good for design. The second layer is that it adds character. Sure, the system was already liquor, candy and liquid, which is already vivid and full of character. But beyond the global design system level, real character in design also lived in unique small details. By the time macOS 10 shipped, Apple had already released their breakthrough iMac G3. So when the system was met with enthusiasm, it cemented Apple's reputation as a design trendsetter. I can easily imagine the tension lifting off the entire team after the release. The realization that the bet had paid off. I like the word bet specifically in this context, because it's about risk and uncertainty. If you have rules and standards, someone established them. If you are certain about your decision, you're in safe zone. But beyond safety, there is no chance of winning either. Showing character is about a unique approach, about a conceptual vision, and almost always about our common established patterns. Because if your character matches the pattern, all you're really doing is expressing yourself within the norm. And we are talking about something different here. Disruptive creative character. And that's the first essential part of the formula for immortal design. And not only design, by the way. I bet many of you are thinking about Windows XP right about now. A wonderful system in my view. Looking at it feels like going back to childhood. There is clear character in these buttons too. If that doesn't feel like enough character compared to Apple's traffic light, look at the Start button. Meaning and character are clearly there in a full measure. So why did some elements stay with us while others became historical artifacts from a distant past? Windows Luna, the legendary Windows XP interface, was solving the same problem as Apple's Aqua, the macOS X design system. Microsoft was developing it in parallel, in a great secrecy, going through several throwaway visual styles before settling on Luna. It was unveiled a year after Aqua and shipped about 7 months after macOS 10. But it was also a design pioneer of its time in its own right. And then Microsoft released their unique flat design, Metro, 3 years before Apple's famously flat iOS 7. And there is no trace of Metro in modern system either. In both cases, Metro and Luna, Microsoft released bold, bright, groundbreaking designs. They were a big bet in themselves, but in both cases, they hit a wave of users' criticism, and Microsoft would either echo the work of more warmly received systems or retreat into safe, familiar colors and shapes. Today, what we see in Windows 11 looks almost like a direct descendant of Windows 98, while Metro and Luna left no trace. Well, almost. Did Apple ever face this kind of criticism wave? It did. macOS 10 turned out to be slow and less functional than its predecessors. Some users called it unserious and made fun of their style. iOS 7 was bashed for inconsistent icons, for the weird mix of flat interfaces with shadows and transparencies and gradients, but Apple drew a major lesson from the success of macOS 10. The design of a system on its own can be a powerful selling factor. And the main part of this success is character and uniqueness. They held onto it with iron grip as the core defining design concept, drawing a line of inheritance through every update, preserving the recognizable details that form this character. The famous traffic light is an important part of that character. Sometimes even more absurd things, the ones that seems out of place or unnecessary at first glance, can be a part of that character. For example, the spinning beach ball of death, which honestly could be described as a design mistake. We have a video about it, and yet it gets preserved from update to update as a part of this subtle identification of character. All of this in defiance of criticism. Luna, personally, is really painful example for me. It really had every chance of becoming the start of defining design phase for Windows. It had wider reach than macOS 10 did. It spawned an entire art genre, Frutiger era, though that one came together with macOS, to be fair, but still, and today many people remember it warmly as a system from their childhood. Sadly, after the first wave of negative reactions, Microsoft immediately decided to take Longhorn, which would later become Vista, in completely different, much safer direction. And even though development dragged on for years, Microsoft chose to stay blind to the signals that the audience had actually embraced Windows XP and grow to love its design. That was the difference. It sounds ironic, but both teams were in their own way blind to user feedback. Microsoft didn't hear the shift in perception, didn't see the positive trend. Apple, on the other hand, completely ignored any feedback that touched the core decisions and concepts of their design. They treated their design character as untouchable personal territory. I would call this self-confidence. And I'd say it's exactly what's characteristic of any design that becomes iconic. Self-confidence. Because novelty taken out to a large audience is guaranteed to trigger negative reactions, among others. Understanding and belief in your own rightness about your core values, that what Microsoft lacked and what Apple had. Surviving every redesign was only the start for the traffic light. In 1995, it suddenly jumped over iPadOS. Apple used it specifically to bring iPad closer to Mac, which means in its 25th year, this element stopped being just a part of macOS. It became the marker of what being a Mac actually means. When you need to give some system that Mac feeling, you bring in the traffic light. Over 25 years, macOS changed everything. Icons moved around, fonts shifted, materials got harder, then softer, but the traffic light stayed where it was. At the beginning of the video, we asked what even is design? Aesthetic, beauty, functionalism, usability. The answer these three circles give, none of those things separately. Though let's be honest, it's bigger than design. It's a bet on character. A bet you make before you have any proof that it's right. And the self-confidence that won't let you take that bet back when everyone around you is saying you got it wrong. Most trends and interfaces in the industry live an average of 5 years. 10 if you're lucky. 25 is an anomaly. And this anomaly doesn't come from the genius of specific decision. Thousands of genius design decisions have been made in this industry, and almost all of them have died. This anomaly comes from the endurance of a company that refused to touch its own, even when it was fashionable to touch everything. Even if you're not a designer, think about this next time someone asks you to redo something that already works. It might be the moment when what you deciding is bigger than an interface. It's whether to let a new symbol form. Most of those moments we miss. Designers who can make this kind of bets are rare in the industry. One of them is Jony Ive, the same Ive whose iMac G3 25 years ago set the visual direction the entire Aqua language grew out of. The colors, the translucency, the soft organic shapes. And the one who later taken over all of Apple design, flattened almost everything Aqua stood for, but left the geometry and colors of the traffic light alone. The shapes that grew out of his own hardware design were the ones he refused to touch. Now he's working on something at the opposite end of spectrum. Not an operating system, a car. The interface of the Ferrari Luce, Ferrari's electric car designed by his studio Lo From together with Mark Newson. Same logic of character on a completely different surface. See how iconic designs are born beyond the computer in our next video. See you there.